Thank you for having me here, React Alicante, and thank you, Chance. That was really great setup for my talk. That was amazing. My name is Aurora. I'm from Norway, and I work as a consultant at Inmeta in Oslo. Excuse me, I'm going to do this one first. I'm excited to be speaking in this beautiful city of Alicante to tell you about enhancing forms with React Server components. And this session is going to include mostly live coding with the goal of teaching you how to work with React Server components in practice. And I work mostly with web development, and in my current consultancy project, I actively use React Server components. So that's kind of what I'm bringing here, is bringing this real-life experience and trying to make it more understandable for you guys. But let's begin by looking at the typical React single-page application. It's really great. You have your React query, your React hook form, and all is well. But client-side apps have their problems. So they run purely with JavaScript, and the entire application is constructed from JavaScript after the user opens the URL. And when working, for example, from a slow device or with a slow connection, it can take a really long time to download and execute this JavaScript to even load the page to fill out a simple form. And even with server-side rendering in a framework like Next.js, you might still experience issues because you fixed your problem of blank screens by pre-rendering the pages, but you now have an even bigger dependency waterfall of server-side rendering the page, downloading, parsing, and executing the JS, and then hydrating the entire page before anything really works. And let's not forget the struggles of working with forms in the Next.js pages router. You had to manually create your own API endpoints every time you wanted to safely submit a form on the server. And you would want to use a library like trpc to get type safety over the server boundary. And you might have to write a bunch of excess, messy code, especially if you're handling errors and loading states. So overall, that was not a very good developer experience. So with React 19, which was announced as a release candidate at ReactConf in May, we now have server components. And server components only run on the server, so therefore they can allow us to fetch data asynchronously inside components and also access all our backend resources. And they can reduce the bundle size by minimizing JS on the client and let us build very performant applications while maintaining an enjoyable developer experience. So what we want to do is use React Server components to write performant, user-friendly forms without a lot of front-end complexity. And we're going to need a framework to use React Server components inside, and Next.js with the app router will be our pick here. Then we will be needing multiple other React 19 features that are already available in the Next.js app router. It's going to be server actions, the form component, use action state, use form status, and use optimistic. So server actions are defined with use server and tells the framework, like Next.js, to generate a hidden post endpoint to a function. And this allows us to call server code from any component, for example, from the client. And it will also simplify the communication across the server while providing type safety using RPC. The new form element is React's extension of the native HTML form, which builds on top of its existing methods. This extension will let you create interactive controls for submitting information, as well as letting the action property now call a function, like a server action. And the function pass will automatically be wrapped in a transition, contain a hidden form data argument with the values of the form, and in the case of a server action, be called as a HTTP post. Use form status is a hook that provides information about the last form submission. It must be used inside a form and can be used, for example, to disable a button or display inputted data while a form is submitting. It also enables progressive enhancement because without JavaScript, the button will still work fine, just not have any feedback. Use action state is a hook that allows you to update state based on the result of an action. It also supports progressive enhancement because it allows the server response to be shown without JavaScript before hydration has completed. And it can be used to display error messages or other information based on the return value. Then, lastly, use optimistic is a hook that lets you optimistically update UI while a background operation completes. It lets you keep the UI snappy by providing instant feedback to interactions. And it can be used with server actions and form submissions, but also with other potentially slow operations, such as filtering based on route params. And this hook stands out because of its ability to seamlessly merge client and server state as the server finishes its update. So with that in mind, let's move on to the demo. And I'm going to be coding a simplified version of something that I've made for my current consultancy project where we're using React Server components. Okay. So we're here in the Next.js app router. And my setup is Prisma as my ORM, and I'm using a local database, and I also have Tailwind for CSS. And my starting files, well, first of all, this is the app router, which means that everything is a server component by default. And the message box component is a server component. And it's also async, because server components can be async, and then they can await a database query here for using Prisma to get messages from the database. And then these messages are being mapped into individual message display components. Hold on, I'm just going to resize this. And this is not really much. It's just another server component, because all it's doing is styling based on whether the user has written the message. And then there is a message input. And this component is also a server component, and it really doesn't do anything. I can try to submit the form, and nothing's going to happen. So the goal here is to make this interactive while reducing the JS on the client and minimizing the front-end complexity. And let's begin by making the form work. So we're going to use the React 19 extension of the form element to bind this action to a function, and it's going to be a server action. I'm going to say submit message. I'm going to create this inside the data access layer here in actions. And since it's a server action, we have to put the directive use server at the top, which will tell Next.js to create a hidden API endpoint to all the functions inside this file. We're going to export an async function, submit message, which will take in a form data object of type form data. And what this means is that each field in this form will be submitted inside the form data object with its value, and the name will be the name of the field. So we can use this to insert into our database, create a message where the data will be content from the form data. Sorry, this is supposed to be like that. Content, and then we're going to type this as a string for now. And now I need also to make a created by ID here. So I need to somehow pass an additional argument to the server action. And you can do that in a couple of ways. You could use .bind to make a copy of a function with initial arguments. But in my case, I'm going to use a hidden input field here. So hidden input field, and it's going to be called created by ID and be bound to user ID. And I'm just going to import this. And I can now get it from the form data, like that. But I have to put a bit of a disclaimer here, because you don't want to pass the user ID from the client side in a real app. That's simply an example of how to pass additional params. So in the real world, you would probably definitely want some kind of server-side authentication setup. But this is OK for the demo. So I'm going to just close this up and see if it works. So I'm just going to insert and then refresh the page, and then it's been submitted. But of course, I don't want to refresh the page, so I'm going to call Next.js revalidate path with a root path, which will tell Next.js to purge the cache and regenerate all the components on this path. So that I can say hi, and then it's already submitted there. But if you notice that, it's like not visible because I had to scroll and see that my message has been submitted. So what I'm going to do to fix that is jump to the message box component and replace this div with an automatic scroller. And this component is a client component because it's going to use an effect and a mutation observer to scroll to the bottom of the page when there is a new child in the container. And it's using a ref here. And this is clearly using some client-side stuff here, so we need it to be a client component. But since it's taking in children, or it could be anything else, like a name prop here, but in this case children, the components, or whatever is inside, can still be server components. Let's just see first, scroll, and it's going to scroll. And if we look inside the console here, and the components, the only component here in the client is the automatic scroller. there's no message display here because this is just a server component. It's made rendered on the server, and then the client doesn't know that this is even a React component, really. So that's pretty cool. The next thing we want to do is validate our data, because this is input from the user or from the client, and we should definitely be validating it. So to do that, we're going to get a result from a message schema, and we're going to safely parse this object here. I'm going to explain that in a second. There we go. And we're just going to use there. So what will happen is we're using Zod, which is a runtime schema validation library, to at runtime check that our object is following these rules, which are that I need to have a minimum length content and a unique ID created by ID. And now we need to handle the case where this did not succeed. So if the result is not a success, we can just throw a new error invalid message. And if I now comment out my client-side validation here and submit an invalid message, I will get this error thrown because it doesn't fit the schema. And there's a bunch of ways to handle errors, but in this case, I'm going to do it by using an error boundary around the message input. So just going to put an error boundary and wrap that. And now, when I have an invalid message, it will be caught by this error boundary, which is really nice. Okay, thank you. One person's clapping for that. Woo. But anyway, I don't actually want to throw an error here. I want to return something. So what I'm going to do is just cut this message first and return first success false and the error. Oops. And I'm going to return a timestamp, and you will see why I need that later. So I'm just going to create this timestamp here, and this is OK. And since we're on the server, maybe you want to do something else, like query the database and decide what action to do based on that. And in this case, I'm going to get the messages for the user with this getMessages function again, with the created by ID. And if this is bigger than 5, we will just return user has reached the message limit, success false, and return the timestamp. And by the way, if you have a bigger form, you can also return the field errors here and use them on the client again. But I only have a single field, so that's OK. So if all is well here, and we can safely insert into the database, and then we can revalidate the path and then return success true. And for some reason, if this insertion fails, we can just let the error boundary handle that problem. So I have a lot of server-side logic here, and I need to get this to the message input and to the user somehow. And we're going to need to use the new React 19 hook, use action state. And it will take in a function to call, which is going to be our action, submit message. And it will take in an initial state. And the initial state will just be success false. And what it returns is a generated component state, which will equal first the initial state, and then after that, the last returned value of the action that useActionState is wrapping. And we'll also get a wrapped action, submit message action. I'm going to call it that. That's kind of the convention here, and put it on the form, and then use the state to render an error message here. And I have a couple of problems. First of all, I'm trying to use a hook. And this is something that I need to have on the client-side JS for. So I'm going to tell the bundler to load the JS for this component with useClient. And then I also have a TypeScript error because useActionState actually passes an additional argument to the action that's wrapping, which is the previous state. And I'm just going to type this here really quick. Message state. Let's see. There we go. So let's see if that works. I'm going to say hello, hi. And now we hit this max message count, and the error has been returned in the state and rendered in the message box, which is really nice. But let's make it a bit more interactive, because I would rather use a toast here to make it feel a bit better. So I'm going to use an effect to toast, excuse me, if there's an error, we're going to toast an error with that error. I need to add the dependency array, and it's going to be the error, but it's also going to be the timestamp, so that it will rerun whenever the timestamp changes. So now I have a nice toast here. And that means I don't actually need this text anymore. But instead of removing it, I'm going to leave it as a no script fallback. So that for some reason, if there is no JS, I will still be able to see this. And now I don't have that anymore. One more problem here is that my form is actually resetting on its own. And the reason for that is that with React 19, form actions and uncontrolled inputs like this one, the form will actually reset automatically when the action has completed. And this is a good thing because it kind of copies the MPA form submission behavior. And maybe, or probably you're used to using like React Hook Form or Formic, where you have this controlled form state. This is just an uncontrolled input. But in this case, I don't want to reset the form, because maybe I would have an error returning that I could change this value and then fix it and then make it valid somehow. So to fix this problem, I'm going to go to the submit message and also return the content here, which is just going to be whatever the user submitted. And then I can use this as the default value of this input field, state content. So now, when useActionState component state returns content, it will be the default value of the field, which is pretty nice. And then there's one more thing to fix here, because let's make this a bit more realistic by awaiting a promise with a slow function here and seeing how that feels. So it's taking quite a long time for me to see that I wasn't able to submit, and maybe I would be clicking the button multiple times. That's not good. So luckily, useActionState actually returns a third value, is pending. And we can use this to just disable the button and say something else here, like sending. And now I will have this nice loading feedback here on the sending. So let me just increase this max message count to 8 and see that it's working again. I'm getting the pending feedback, the reset, and the automatic scrolling. And what's interesting here is that this entire form actually works without JavaScript. So let me just disable the JavaScript here so we can see that. And I'm going to try to say no JavaScript. And I got a full page refresh. I did not get any scrolling, and I didn't get any pending feedback, but everything still worked. Let's say still no JS. It's working. One more. And now I hit this max message count, and the no script fallback is rendered. Let me just get back to the interactive version here. There we go. So what we've essentially been doing here is progressively enhancing this form, meaning we're ensuring all the basic functionality works at the lowest level of resources, which is no JavaScript, and then adding things on top to enhance the user experience for any user that has additional resources available. So let's say that the user is on a slow device and is waiting for JS to download, parse, or execute. Well, now the form will work before the JS has even hydrated the page, and will ensure that the JS that we do want will hydrate faster, because we weave the client and the server together with this automatic scroller. So depending on the user situation, they will have a better experience and always have a form that works. But I'm going to work a little bit more on this, because the is pending is nice, but it's not very reusable. Maybe I want to have the same pattern in a different component. So I'm just going to extract this into a submit button and say send here. I'm going to make it inside my UI components. And I'm going to paste it here. So What I want to do is somehow get the isPending value from somewhere else. And what I'm going to do is use another React 19 hook, use form status. And this hook returns a bunch of things: data, pending, method, and action, which is all going to be from the parent form that this component is inside, essentially using the parent form as a provider. And we're only going to use the pending here. I think my ESLint just, hold on. If I can get that working again, that would be nice. Let's try. Hopefully. Okay, I'm going to do it manually then. That's fine. Anyway, so this is now being used instead of this is being used as our pending state. And if it's pending, we're going to return a nicely styled div with a spinner. Oops, spinner. And just the children here. And if it's not pending, we can just return the children. And we need this from the props, so let's make some props and put it on the component. Hello, Copilot. There we go. And spell this correctly. And probably, if you're going to make this even more reusable, you can like extend the button props here so that you can add additional area stuff, whatever. Or you can add an additional loading so that you can trigger the spinner in a different way. But this is okay for now. So let's just import this and see if it's spinning. Spinning. Yes, it's spinning. But the real key with this submit button is this can actually be just thrown into any component. Oops, so let's do that. Even a server component here. So what I want to do here is reset. I'm going to just quickly make a form with an action with reset messages. And wrap it around the button and import it. And I'm just going to do an inline server action here, so it's really fast. Don't want any of this. Reset messages. And this function will be a server action, so it's going to be use server. It's going to be slow. It's going to delete all the messages from the database, and it's going to revalidate the path. And now I forgot to add use client to my submit button because, again, this is a hook. You need to add use client here to get this client-side interactivity. Let's see if this worked. So we're in the message box, we're on the server component, and I just wrapped a form around the submit button. And now it's actually handling its own pending state, even though I'm on the server here, which means this button is actually completely composable. Woo! Composability. Thank you, Chance. I have one more thing to show here, so I'm just going to remove all this code. Goodbye. And jump over to an optimistic branch here. And in this branch, I haven't done that much, but I've extracted the messages into its own component, and I'm passing the messages down from the server. And this is a client component now, because I want to use a new React 19 hook, use optimistic. And this hook takes in a state to show when no action is pending, which is going to be our truth from the server here, and an update function. And in this case, I'm spreading the messages with a new message where the new message has an ascending set to true. And it returns the optimistic messages and the function to trigger the optimistic update. And I'm passing this to the input. And in here, I've just added another progressive enhancement with an onSubmit here, which is starting a transition around the optimistic update and then the actual action to update on the server. And it's acting like the fallback here, where the onSubmit is the progressive enhancement. So let's see how that feels now. I'm going to say optimistic. So it's submitting right away and displaying the sending while it's happening on the server here. So hello. So as what's happening here is actually that we have this client state with the sending, and then as the server returns, It will replace the client state or essentially throw it away, and then that is now our truth again. So let's do a couple more. And then eventually we will hit this max message count there, and then whatever doesn't exist on the server has been thrown away because it's only temporary client state. Yes, that's nice. I think that's it for my demo. So the bottom line here is that depending on your app, you can decide whether you want to still use your React form or your formic or whatever you want, but you can also use these more primitive features of the web together with React 19 server components to make very robust and user-friendly forms while still having a good DX. I'm just going to jump over to my slides here at the end. OK, we're back. It's worth noting that submitting forms with actions is not a new concept in the meta framework world. Remix has been doing this for a long time and has been building on the principle of progressive enhancement ever since they released the framework, and they enable it with their loaders and actions and focus on web standards. Then in SvelteKit and Nux, they also have somewhat the same thing, but of course the frameworks each have different implementations, features, and developer experience. So the good thing is that what we've been learning here is applicable outside Next.js as well. However, I would say that the Next.js way using server actions stands out by separating the action from the route, which makes it more versatile and simplifies cases such as handling multiple forms in one route. That wraps up the talk. So this is the repo if you want to check it out, the code that I just wrote. And then the optimistic UI is in a separate branch. Okay. I also have references. It's just the React docs and Next.js docs. That's good to read. And you can message me on Twitter and follow me there. Whoops. And I post RC stuff, and I have a blog as well with RC stuff. Thank you for having me, React Alicante.